Okay. Hey everyone. So I can just see in the chat right now. If you guys want, I can extend the deadline. The only thing though is that you should use the assignments to study for the midterm because it's just the like similar questions. So for Jason and Laura that want the due date extended, like I'd imagine that you should study by doing the assignments. Like that's why I did it that way, so that way you could force you to study. How do you guys feel about that? Am I frozen? Yeah, like so with Keisha too. That's the only thing though is that uh yeah, which one are you guys talking about? Like the lab quizzes. Sorry, so the quizzes are the ones that you could go in and out and to use to study for the midterm. Which one are you guys referring to? Yeah, the two online quizzes that are due on the second. I can extend it, but you guys should use it. Like you guys should be done them now to study, right? Like after today, you'll have all of the material. So the two online quizzes are basically all short answer, multiple. Sorry, no, sorry. They're all multiple choice, matching, and true and false questions that you and fill in the blank. I think that they are questions related to each of like lectures 1 through 6 to sort of prepare you for the midterm. So they're formative. What does formative mean? No, they're for marks. I think that they're each worth total. I think total there's four worth 10%. No, they are. So the midterm is going to be next week during this time. The quizzes, there's no time limit. You go in and out. They're open book. You just got to go in and complete them. And no, I'm not. They're not the quizzes that are embedded in the lab. Has anyone? I've had lots of students that have completed them. Does anyone? Does anyone? Has anyone submitted them? Like you go in and cannot be due the same day as those online. Um. Well, I don't know. Like so, the online they're due on the midterm because you're supposed to use them to study, right? You're supposed to complete those as you've been going along because you can go in and out. So I can't push back the midterm. So you wanted me to make them due earlier? Yeah, you can do it in multiple settings. For those quizzes, those two quizzes, you go in and out and then just like complete them. Yeah, the midterm is going to be monitored. So the midterm is going to be 65 multiple choice questions during class time, and it will be like the same thing with the monitoring. Yes, those quizzes are for marks. So can everyone pull up their syllabus? So the monitoring works where you will log in and then you'll have to select through your Respondus link. So Respondus lockdown browser and Respondus monitor. And once you set that up, then you will complete the midterm, like Proctor Track. Yeah. It's 65 multiple choice. I'll give you a breakdown of the number of multiple choice from each lecture. I'll post that. And yeah, so we'll have like a window that you will have to write it. So I'll start the exam at like 3. You can enter it at 3, and then it has to be completed by, let's say, 5. And then for those of that have accommodations, whatever their accommodations are. Yep. So you need your webcam working. I feel like it is through like the Ontario Tech like downloadable software. Sure, yeah, yeah. I'll post like sort of how to sort of use it. Has anyone so the majority of you that even had me last year had to use the Respondus monitor. Did you have to download anything or was it just on your laptops, Marco? Okay, so if you have Respondus lockdown, the monitor is already there. Courtney's okay. So did you have to download Respondus or was it just there? Okay. So we are using Respondus, not PropTrack. Yeah, so we're all using Respondus. So you guys are all okay with that? Respondus lockdown browser and monitor would just be another program. You do need a webcam. I believe you have to show your ID and scan the room. I believe so. Yes. Oh, it scans your face. Okay. Yes. Lectures 1 to 6. Yeah. So what you like before you can start the exam, you have to set up your Respondus. So you set it up, you get it all going, and then once you've completed that and you get the okay, then you can open the link for the midterm. Is everyone okay? Okay. I'll do an announcement that'll have the breakdown of the midterm, and then I'll have the link on how to use Respondus, and then just like sort of information in that announcement. Okay. The exam will start at around our class time. Yeah, I usually open it, allow it to be open half an hour before, so from like 3 to 5. Yeah, I think it's back there. I'm not sure how we did it. Was there backtracking in Intro to Moving Neuroscience? Then yeah, then it would just be the same. My screen's very limited, and on like when I submit the questions, and it sort of all populates it. No, sorry there, Jason. It's because of it, like the exam, like I'm getting slack for having a window. You should all be logged in on the midterm at the same time, or else, like, obviously, like, you're just gonna ask your friends what the questions were. Like, that's what I would do. Yeah, I can extend the quizzes, but I feel like it's like doing yourself a disservice. Like, you should do them before you do the midterm. Like, you should just do them to study. Has anyone done the quizzes? Like, I feel bad for you, Amna. Like, you should have like you like because like you could have go in there now and like you could have like followed along and then do you know what I mean? You don't see the you don't see the correct answers. You get your score. Because if you saw the correct answers, then you would just tell like the next man's, and then they would just know the answers, and then like that's just how it works, right? This whole online thing has made it difficult for the faculty. So the midterm, yes, is on March 2nd during class time. I don't think that they're so the people that have done the online quizzes were they difficult or like give me feedback. Okay. I would say that the online quizzes are more difficult than the midterm. The online quizzes I took from like terminology from the textbook, just because it had more. So I find that the midterm is just more like succinct with it. So if you know the questions for the if you can do the questions for the online quizzes, then you should be golden for the midterm, to be honest. So Courtney, she said like average. Is there any questions you have in particular to any of the material? Okay, think about it, and then guys, email me if there's anything. Let's go through this lecture now, and then keep asking me questions as we go through. Is that cool, everyone? So we're all good. I know, again, like second semester pandemic, it's been a bit of a shit show, but hopefully you guys are doing okay. Any concerns with the course, like specifically? Any comments or concerns about the material from the lectures? Is there anything that I can do better? Honestly, good, good. Okay. This class should be like in comparison to neuroscience, this is more like interesting, right? Like it's more like sort of relatable to the things that we just sort of notice in everyday life. And hopefully with this lecture, we're really getting into like things that like will like spur your sort of memory and things that you've seen and done and like all of sort of like your like sports careers or like training or like, even in school. So let's get started. Oh, sidebar, I'm getting my vaccine tomorrow, so I'll let you know if I don't make it to the if I don't make it to the exam, know that I had a reaction. Okay, so let's get started with this lecture. So today's lecture, we're going to be discussing attention and memory. And so the lecture is going to be divided up into two different components. The first one is attention, and then we're going to finish off with talking about memory. And this is going to be highly relatable to not only this course, but when we're talking about memory, it's going to hopefully give you an idea of how to study or sort of understand like cognitive memory as well. So let's first start talking about attention. So when we're preparing and performing motor skills, it is influenced by our capacity to select and attend to information. Our requirement to be attentive of the things that we're doing limits what we can do. And so the main example would be multitasking. So if I'm multitasking, sometimes you're unavailable. Like if you're doing multiple things at once, what generally happens? Yeah, there's usually problems, right? And that was one thing. So we're talking about motor control research. That was one thing that people notice. When you start to do one thing, you can do it very well. You start adding multiple things, like all like multiple tasks. Then all of a sudden you get a slowing down, or you get an inability to do one task. All of a sudden performance is affected. And so that was something that was easily studyable because it was wildly sort of observable, that like many scientists had noticed this, and people had noticed this sort of phenomenon. So when we're talking about attention in when applied to motor skill and performance, my attention is associated with two different things. The first thing is consciousness and awareness. And so my attention is what I'm consciously thinking or aware of as I'm performing a motor skill. So when we talked about Ronaldo, remember that video where they turn the lights off and he could still complete the kick? What is he attending to? What was he sort of visualizing in the performance of the motor skill that allowed him to do that? Was he looking at particular things in the environment? Was he thinking to himself? That consciousness, what we're consciously sort of aware of, so thinking about or observing, is what we're talking about when what we're attending to when we're doing a motor skill. The other term, like amount of attention, is talking about cognitive effort. So it's the amount of mental effort associated or required by a particular motor skill. So if this requires attention, it's implying, sorry, if I say this motor skill requires attention, it's implying that it sort of requires an amount of cognitive effort. So when we're talking about motor skills, attention is specifically our consciousness on what we're attending to. And each skill is going to require a certain amount of attention or cognitive effort. Does that make sense? Awesome. So when researchers were like, well, how am I going to study this? Study attention and motor skills. They're going to look at two different things. They're going to look at the effect of performance of simultaneous performance of multiple skills. So they're going to look at how performing multiple skills, which screws up your attention or it divides your attention up into different things, how that affects motor performance. And then the other ones where what they wanted to look at, what are people attending to when they're performing motor skills? So what are they consciously aware of? And so those are the two types of studies. And if you have the textbook, you'll go through all of them. The types of studies that when they were evaluating attention and motor performance, that's what they were looking at. So the first one was this whole idea of attention and multitasking. And so the phenomenon of realizing that when you do multiple tasks at once, your motor performance tends to decrease, or you won't be able to even complete the motor task that you're trying to do. And so one guy did a study in 1890 that showed this, that when he would test the grip strength of people, and when they had them do like it was mental math while doing the grip strength, their grip strength decreased. So it just showed performance. And obviously there's tons of others different sort of situations that we can think of when multitasking affects our performance. And so when we're multitasking, what can happen? You guys had mentioned it, like Courtney and Dean had mentioned it. Marco even did as well. And you can have, when you're multitasking, you can have no difficulties in performing all of the tasks. You can have an ability to complete the tasks, but you're just going slower, or you have some performance impairment, or you're unable to complete all or one of the tasks simultaneously. So then studies wanted to look at, well, what's the sort of factors behind this? And so here's examples of multitasking. And so I had a video, but it's specifically saying what I'm saying now, is that we have issues when performing multiple things at once. And so realizing this in various different studies, researchers wanted to come up with like a theory as to why that is. Like if the whole idea with motor control research and like sort of like, remember we were talking about how this came from psychology and behavioral psychology, what if we can come up with a theory of how the brain processes information and processes things? How can we come up with an idea of why we see this phenomenon? So what could it be? Any guesses? What? Right? There's no right answer, no wrong answer. But think of your like yourself as a researcher in the 50s. If you're gonna sort of like think of your brain as like a computer, what could be a reason why there's a problem with doing multiple things at once? Yeah, capacity. Yeah, maybe poor wiring. Think of it. I think of it like a computer, right? Like it's just too much. Like there's too much happening at once. Oh, exactly. So we're all right, right? So like we all have really good ideas as to why this potentially can happen. And remember, this is before MRI, so they had no idea physiologically what was happening inside the brain. And so the first round of ideas is exactly what you guys came up with was this idea of like this capacity of the brain has an imbalance or an inability to process multiple things at once. And so the first round of theories of researchers that noticed this in different studies, they came up with this idea called the filter theories, or what were also called bottleneck theories. And so what these theories by all these different research, they propose that a person experiences difficulty when doing multiple tasks simultaneously because of an inability of the brain to serially process multiple stimuli at once. So can you guys see my cursor? So here we have sensory information coming into the brain from the environment. So environmental information detection identification. See here, where this is suggesting that only your brain can only process one thing at one time. So it creates a bottleneck. So the problem is that when we're taking in sensory information and deciding on an output, we can only process that one at a time. And so therefore you get a problem with doing multiple things at once because you can only it takes time to filter information, one aspect, like one skill, the other skill. So that's why they called it a bottleneck theory. Does that make sense, everyone? So that was the first guess as to what goes down in the brain. But then researchers developed this idea because they talked about, have you guys ever heard of the cocktail party phenomenon? It's an outdated term, but what it means is that, okay, so let's say I'm having a conversation with you, right? I'm aware if the brain can process one thing at once, if I'm talking to you, I'm focusing in on you, right? So that's what would be my processing. Then how come if I hear someone talking smack about me, if I hear my name in the background, I'll draw my attention and I'll look, even though I'm focusing on that person. So that proves that your brain is processing stuff, or else I wouldn't know my name. So then they said, okay, so this proves that the bottleneck theory isn't true. It's got to be something more difficult than that, so something more involved than that. So they said we needed to change our theory to account for this phenomenon, that we are able to process multiple things at once. We're able to block unwanted information until we need it by orientating. So our brain is able to take in multiple things and process it, but then what it does is it sort of prioritizes what's most important in that situation. That makes a better idea. That seems to sort of be a theory that accounts for limitations in multitasking, with multitasking, sorry, and this whole cocktail party phenomenon. Now, what I guys want you guys to do is I want you to watch this video. It's super informative. And I really like the way that this woman did it. She did like it with a animation board. And so just sort of giving the history of theories of selective attention. So it just goes into more detail than what I'm talking about now. I just don't want to lose time just because we talked about the midterm. And I'm sure you guys are going to have more questions. So it's there for you, okay? So the next round of theories to account for what we just talked about with the cocktail party phenomenon were called the central resource capacities. The central resource capacity theories. Now, I think it was Nadine that had mentioned capacity. No, it was, who said capacity? Who said it? Ryuda. Oh, there he is. Hey, what's up? Have you been practicing your circle drawing? Hey, Drew, did you get sleeves yet? I'm laughing. Okay. So the next round of theories were called central resource capacity theories. And what they suggested, like I said, was that we could carry out processing in parallel, that we would be able to process multiple things at once. However, what the central resource capacity theory suggested is that there was an amount of capacity or central, there's a central capacity that we are able to process with. And that depending on what you're doing or what you're multitasking or what you're processing, each will take a certain amount of, resources or a certain amount of that central capacity. And so if you are doing multiple skills that they stay within the limits of the capacity of your brain or the processing power, then you're good. But if the multiple skills or the multiple things that you're doing take more effort or more power or more capacity than the limits that you have in your brain, then you're going to get a slowing down of one or of the multiple skills that you're trying to do at once. Does that make sense? Guys? Okay. So here we have an example of a proposed central resource of attention. So we have a central amount of cognitive effort or attention. And here's an example. So here's the big circle. And then we have an example of two different tasks. So task B is talking with a passenger, and task A is driving a car. Now, given the amount of capacity that we have, is this person able to do both at once? What do we say, Amna? There you go, right? Because it's not coming out of the capacity. Does that make sense? Now, the very famous, it makes sense, right? So the most famous of these central resource capacity theory was the Kahneman's attention theory. And the reason why this one was the one that kind of stuck or was the most popular or the most important was because he sort of dived in more to really sort of describe how everything would work. And so what he found and what he commented on was that we have this central capacity of the amount of processing that the brain can have. And he said that that capacity is flexible based on your arousal level. Because if you get right out of bed and you're all groggy and you're sort of just woke up, are you going to be able to better multitask or not? Or if you're super tired, do you find that you are unable or more able to multitask? Right. You're unable to do those things. So he's suggesting that based on your arousal level, right? Based on your melatonin or serotonin, you have a flexible amount of capacity. So when you're really, really awake, not stressed, you are able to do multiple things at once. Make sense? So in his diagram, he suggested that this is the available capacity to do multiple things. And then he also proposed that we allocate priority of our attention based on 3 different factors. Okay? He suggested that we will prioritize, naturally prioritize the skills or our attention to ensure that there's a completion of one task. So if you think of multitasking, you're usually really focused on one. So you're usually really sort of focused on completing at least one task. We generally, so this idea of enduring dispositions, he commented on the fact that typically if there's something that's outside of the normal, we tends to draw our attention. So if you hear like a firecracker, a loud noise, a very like something that is meaningful, like so our name at a cocktail party, right? Something that is novel for the situation, it tends to draw our attention. Can we all agree on that? So you're focused, like, so his example was that you're focused in on talking with someone, and that's going to be your priority, right? You're completing one task. However, because you're hearing your name, for us socially, it means a lot to us that it naturally just draws your attention. And then he said that you can also allocate your attention based on momentary intention. So if I tell myself, only focus on this person, only focus on this person, and try to like, I don't know, as many of you guys have kids or like, you know, your friends are being like you're trying to like talk to like you're trying to talk to someone, you're trying to like your crush, and then your friends are tripping you in the background trying to egg you on. You're gonna block them out because you're gonna be focusing on the one thing. You can tell yourself to allocate your attention on one specific thing. So these were sort of the rules that he said that our capacity was sort of works on. And I agree with it. So let's go back a couple of slides. And so remember, the 3 points of his theory were that there's a general pool of effort that dictates how much we can do in terms of multitasking. And that capacity is going to increase or decrease based on the person's state of excitability or arousal level. Whereas when you're moderately aroused, you have the most capacity. If you're super stressed, you can't multitask. It decreases our attention ability. Or if you're really tired, also. So there's a heavy middle ground, right? Because if you guys are crazy stressed, like all of you are always like crazy stressed, right? Not hating, but just saying when you're stressed, is it hard to do multiple things at once? Is it hard to like, right? So at least this gives like a science behind it. Because like obviously for studying that's cognitive, right? But we see this with motor skill stuff, and we're going to be talking about choking athletes that choke in sports. It's because they're stressed. Since then, and if you guys continue on in sort of neuroscience, sort of research or motor control research, what the studies are now saying is that there's actually multiple resource theories. So they've taken it, like, so we remember central resource capacity theories. Kahneman's was the most popular. Now theories are talking about multiple resource theories. So instead of one circle, you have multiple circles, and a skill will take amounts from each circle, and each circle will be related to, like, for example, sensory input, response output, stage of processing, type of memory. So they're trying to come up with research now of, okay, so if it's multiple resources and each skill to multitask takes a certain amount, then what would be the different sort of like, okay, so what are the multiple resources? How is it divided up? And that's what sort of research is looking at. Oh, Anna said, does multitasking affect your quality of work because you're, yeah. What do you guys think? Think about studying while watching Netflix versus studying while talking to your mom versus studying alone. Or think about, can anyone else think of a good example? Think about like a motor skill. Amina, does that make sense? Boom. Okay. So I think it's interesting. Oh, car accidents happen. Yeah. Well, oh my God, because that's what we're talking about right now. Oh my God. Yo, Selena was in on it. We talked about this earlier in the class, so it was a setup. Okay, so research wanted to like sort of assess this whole multitasking thing, right? And so the experimental like procedure that they developed to do that was called the dual task procedure. Do 2 tasks at once and see what happens. Right? Like obviously. So what they would do is they would want to sort of assess someone's attention demands, simultaneously performing two different tasks. So they would do one task, see how they did, and then they would add the secondary task to see if it changed their ability to do the primary task. So whatever so they did all crazy multiple types of things. So they did, give me something, typing, and then typing while talking to someone and seeing how it affects your typing. So there's the primary task and then the secondary task. You first have to see what doing the primary task alone is like. And then if you do it while doing the secondary task, well, then you go. Then you can see if it affects your ability. So when you did it, you could note the degree of interference caused on the primary task by the secondary task. And then you can compare how they did. Does that make sense? Pretty similar, right? We're pretty simple. So back with what Selena was saying is, remember the study that I don't know if like you guys probably are too young, right? Like I'm not that much older than you guys, but it used to be that Bluetooth was also illegal. You couldn't have like Bluetooth in your car. You weren't allowed to have that. And it was because of this study. So this study in 2008 used dual task procedure. It was like a driving simulator, and then they would have someone like doing and like count the number of like missed traffic signals, and then they had them do it while they had a handheld or so handheld while they were holding the phone, versus when they had Bluetooth going. So hands free. And what they found was that there was no difference in the errors of whether or not it was hands-free or Bluetooth, that both, so that in having a conversation with someone, either like holding the phone or through Bluetooth, led to the same amount of errors. So then half the states were like, well, then you can't use Bluetooth. They didn't pass the law. So then they did a restudy and they looked at what if, and then they compared it to what happens if you had someone in the passenger seat. Okay, so have you ever guys been like just yelling at someone? Like, have you ever been fighting with someone on the phone while you're driving, and it's like stressing you out? Now think of the difference of when you're talking with someone that's sitting beside you. It tends not to affect your driving ability. Why is that? Any suggestions? Any guesses? Really? You guys multitasking right now? You have to guess what type of face they are. Yeah, good ones. So they suggested that the reason, yeah, it's shared awareness. So if you're talking with someone in the passenger seat while you're driving, you both react to the same environment. So if like someone runs out in the middle of the road, you're both gonna be like, ah, right? Because you're shared awareness. Versus someone on the phone, they're gonna be like you're having like the attention provided to providing that conversation. It's not a shared awareness. And so that was their suggestion. Interesting, right? You guys good? What's the meaning? Can I get it? Oh yeah. There you go. So Ivan asked a question. If you both see the person, how does the passenger affect what you see? No, that's what we're saying is that when it's a passenger, there's no limitation in ability to drive. So example, if the conversation is with a passenger, so multitasking is driving while conversing with someone beside you in the car, there's no limitation. Whereas driving while having a conversation with someone on the phone does lead to an inability to multitask. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. I screwed up. I got cocky. Okay. Guys, okay? So let's talk about focusing attention, because remember with Kahneman's theory, he said that you can forcefully focus your attention on different things, correct? So this whole idea of being able to change our attention, or what we're attending our cognition to, or what we're aware of in our environment, is called intentional focus. So our attentional focus is defined as the direction of where our attention is sort of being directed to while performing something, during the performance or in the performance environment. Because I can concentrate inside my head, or I can concentrate sort of externally, right? So your attentional focus can be considered in terms of the width. So am I focusing on one specific thing, like narrowly focusing on just one thing and blocking everything out? Or do I have a wide angle of focus, meaning that I'm trying to focus in on multiple things at once? So that means width of focus. And then direction of focus is, where am I directing my attention? Am I directing it externally to the environment, or am I directing it internally into my thoughts? Because what they found in research was that you can either, while you're doing something, you're either focusing internally into your own head, listen to what you're thinking, or you're focusing externally. Like that whole term, I'm in my head. And so someone's ability to change their attention externally, internally, or change the width of their attention is called attention switching. So we're able to change our attention. We're able to switch our attention from one area to another based on what we're required to do. So here's like classic examples of sort of changing our attention. So we are able to shift our attention, focus based on the task and environment. So an example would be a quarterback executing a play. So he is he's looking at the receivers, trying to figure out where to throw the ball, while he's sort of being aware of like people behind him to see if he's going to be tackled. So he has a wide focus of attention because he's trying to look at multiple things at once. And then inappropriate attention switching can result in performance problems. So think about when you're cooking, right? You're cooking, you're tending to, like, I don't know, frying up something, right? Like, I don't know, you guys are all super healthy. So like quinoa and goat cheese, tofu, something, right? And then the phone rings, and so you go to grab it. Your attention is going to switch to the phone, and then all of a sudden, oh crap, you spilled something. So sometimes switching attention is the problem, that you're focusing on one thing that needs to be done, and your attention switches to something else, and so you've lost attention or focus on one task, and then therefore the performance of the task decreases. So that's talking about our focus of attention and how we have to switch it in daily life and during during performance of motor skills. And so let me ask you guys this question. Does having an internal or external direction of attentional focus matter? So when performing a motor skill, is it preferable to have the performer, so let's say in this case you, to focus your attention on your movements internally, like think about what you're doing and make sure you're doing it right? Or is it better to think externally and focus on the movements and like the environment and the goal? Okay, absolutely right. Exactly. So you guys, okay, so Apollo's done this course before, clearly. Or have I already said it? I think I already said it. How did you know that, Apollo? Because you're right. Oh, well, there you go. It's all right. So research has shown that performance improves when we're focusing attention externally on the intended outcome, right? So if I'm shooting a free throw, it's better if I'm looking at the rim and focusing in on the goal versus being like in my head, oh man, I gotta make sure that I don't, that last shot was too strong, so I gotta go make sure I do it less. I gotta make sure I do it less. Having an internal focus disrupts. So remember, when motor learning, it's repetition, and you organize, you improve your coordination through repetition. By having an internal focus, it sort of breaks down the automation of like the repetition, like the sort of coordination that you've developed through practice, by thinking internally, it kind of screws that up. And so if you're focusing your attention to internal, you can't do proper perception action coupling. You can't be properly attending to your environment and using the most important information to perform the task that you're like the task that you're trying to complete. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. There you go. Okay. And so based on what Apollo was saying, that's exactly sort of like the sort of idea behind choking that we see in sports. So that hypothesis was called the de-automation of skills hypothesis. Question from Mark, and he says, is that the same with lifting a weight? So this will be true with any skill. Because it's about the intended goal. So if your goal is, okay, I got to make sure that I flex my bicep, right? I want to make sure that I'm getting my bicep, right? Then that's the goal of the exercise. So it's a little bit different. I get where you're going with this, Mark, but do you notice the sort of the difference? Yeah, so no, actually, so if anything, Apollo, internal attention would be more beneficial during practice. So maybe you have to change certain things around. Like, I don't know, like change your form, like Mark was saying. Yeah. So with Mark, you know what I would do, like as a trainer, I used to train people. You would get what I would do is I would touch. I usually touch the muscle. Be like, no, this is where you want to get the contraction. Feel the contraction there. Feel the contraction there. Feel the contraction there. Okay, and then you get them going, right? And then lift the weight, lift the weight, lift the weight. So then you get them thinking internally to maybe alter something, and then you get them back externally again. Cool. Is everyone okay with that, or did me and Mark and maybe Apollo confuse you all? Everyone good? Thanks, Drew. Okay. So that skill, so this whole idea of choking is called de-automation of skills, meaning that like with practice, you've become automatic at doing a particular skill, right? The coordination is there. You're like, it's like second nature now. By thinking internally, you're disrupting the automation that you've developed through practice. So this is where we get this whole idea of choking in sports. This idea that, I don't know, can you guys think of who's a big choker? So C-Web, DeMar, yeah, sorry, DeMar. Yeah, Westbrook. Trying to think of his examples. Pandemic P. Yeah, that's what it is. That's what 100% Paul George. He was probably so stressed out, right? He couldn't hit a shot. Oh, I didn't see it last night. I watched the Raptors game on Monday though. No, wait, Sunday. So if someone, their idea with athletes that choke is that they're so stressed out, they want to do so well that their focus is going internally and they're screwing up the rhythm. But just like Mark was saying, internal focus is appropriate for beginners to learn or perform motor skills. Sorry, I think that was Apollo that said that. Shout out. Okay, cool. Okay, so that leads to this whole idea of automaticity. So do you notice that, as you get good at something, what about this phenomenon, everyone? So as you become better and better at something, does it require less or more attention? Less. So that was another thing that they realized in research was that the amount of attention that a skill requires also changes. The better you get at it, it requires less attention. So that's why when people are becoming good at sports or they become good at a skill, they can start now multitasking with more and more stuff because the amount of attention in the primary task has decreased. And so this whole idea the term is called automaticity. It indicates the performance of a skill with little or no demands on attention capacity. And that's because they've developed through practice an ability to to do it automatically. Now, there are some studies that have looked at functionally in the brain what goes down. And so they looked at skills with a functional MRI, which is like it looks at where the blood is while you're doing an MRI of the head. And what they did was they looked at what parts of the brain are being used when you are doing a skill that you are automatic with versus a skill that you are not. And when you have automaticity, there's no interference with a dual task procedure. There's no problem with multitasking. And the main area of the brain that's going is the supplementary motor area, right? What the motor planning areas. Whereas if you have no automaticity, meaning that you are a beginner or this is taking too much attention demands, you have to think about it, there is going to be interference in multitasking, a dual task procedure. And then the area of the brain is the prefrontal areas. That's where we think. So obviously cognitively, you're going to be like thinking about stuff. So it makes sense, right? Boom. Now, let's talk about visual selective attention. And when we're doing motor skills, and I remember like going back to the Ronaldo video, typically because humans prioritize vision, a lot of what we're sort of like attending to when we're performing motor skills is picking out the relevant things in the environment that are required to complete the task. So this whole idea of selective attention is being able to focus attention to detect specific things that are important in the environment for performance of that task. So with practice, you'll get better and better at picking out the relevant things. And so when that involves our eyes, it's called visual selective attention, which is important. So they did one study where they looked at beginner drivers versus drivers that have been driving for years. And they looked at their eyes, and beginner drivers are driving and their eyes are going all over the place, right? Looking over God, trying to pick out everything. Whereas people, when they are like, been driving for years and years and years, what they looked at, their eyes were very focused on certain things. They would like, there wasn't like erratic eye movement. It was like focusing on car in front, lane, car in front, rear view, car in front. Like they're very specific. So with practice, they're able to visually focus in on the things that are most relevant to that task. And throughout research, what they found is that as you become better and better at a particular motor skill, you're better at picking out visually the most relevant things in the environment for that motor skill. So Ronaldo in that video, when the lights went out, that video, he was better able to pick out the relevant information in the environment. The way that the guy kicking the ball was moving, his leg position, the ball orientation, all of that stuff. He was better able to sort of process that than the beginner was. So the ability to search for what's most relevant in the environment is called the visual search. And as you get more and more experienced, you're able to better pick out. Your search is more accurate. Your search is more efficient, your visual search. Because we have to visually attend to specific things to complete the task. Does that make sense, everyone? Right. And so I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but so when you're focusing on one thing, remember who I don't know who mentioned it, car accidents. Hey, like you guys ever like heard of like looked but failed to see accidents? When we're focusing our visual attention on something, it's hard for us to focus on other things. Does that make sense? So if we look at have you guys ever seen this video? It's not working. It's not working. There it goes. All right, here we go. Everyone watch it. Watch it.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla?
Did anyone not see the gorilla? Did anyone not see the gorilla? I feel like everyone did, but...
This video is from research by...
So the idea would be that once you're focusing it, like, right, makes sense, right? If you're focusing in on something, your attention is being focused into that specifically, you're going to be missing other things because there's a capacity of your attention. That's called inattention and blindness. Yeah. And when we were talking about the driving study, so the main sort of studies in terms of motor control that have looked at sort of like visual attention and what people are attending to while they're performing motor skills are using those eye movement recording goggles. So do you remember the goggles that would track where the pupils are going? That. And so it's most common to use that technique when investigating visual selective attention because it looks at what the people are sort of attending to, right? Because consciously they're not usually aware of, okay, I'm looking at a picture, I'm looking at his elbow. They're not really sure what they're doing. It just kind of automatically happens. The eye movement recordings tell you exactly what they're looking at. So you remember this is what they looked like. So some of the limitations with using this are that this is only looking at the fovea or central vision. So it's what we're focusing on specifically, but we can think of peripheral vision. We can be aware of things in the periphery, but we are most focused on central vision. So that's a limitation with the eye movement recordings. And also when we're focusing in on something, and if I'm attending to something, I can't switch my focus to something else without breaking attention. So that is a good guess. So given that fact, this is a good reasonable guess of what people are visually attending to while performing motor skills. Therefore, it was used a lot in research. And so the next slides are talking about sort of ideas of like looking at different motor skills and what people were visually sort of attending to. Now, when looking at sort of like in generally what people look at while they're performing motor skills, they'll do a visual search, right? They'll look in the environment for what's most relevant for that particular motor skill. So like I said, that's called a visual search, and it's trying to pick out the regulatory conditions. Remember we talked about the regulatory conditions in the environment while performing a motor skill are the environmental features that impact our movement. So when performing a motor skill, our eyes are searching for what's most important in the environment to dictate how we should move. And with experience, you look at less because you better pick out, oh, it's this. Oh, I got to go to this. Oh, I got to go to this. You're better at picking out what's most relevant in the environment. And so that whole theory of visual search is called the feature integration theory. And it's sort of like a mapping idea of how your retina does it. Not heavily important, but if you wanted to look at sort of like ideas of how we develop our visual search, there's a link there. Okay. So this was the beginning of studies that looked at using the eye movement recordings or looking at visual search patterns to look at what people are looking at while they're performing a motor skill. And just like a lot of different motor control studies, they looked at beginners versus pros and look at the differences because it gives you an idea of sort of how the motor processes have evolved in the repetition or practice of going from beginner to expert. And then you can teach that, right? Oh, if like this is what they're doing, maybe I can help highlight it, or maybe I can go to a rehab setting and retrain people that have been injured. So one study looked at badminton. There's a lot of badminton studies, so it's interesting that was used a lot in research. But this study was in 1993. They realized that the visual search for the environment when doing a motor skill in experts is quicker. So you become more efficient. Makes sense, right? And this study in 2006, it was using soccer players and showing like different game sequences. So they would show beginners and then experts. They would show them different plays, and then the experts were better at picking out the plays quicker, obviously. So these two things show that the visual search is more efficient. They know what to look for in experts versus beginners. So these are just two examples. Is everyone cool with that? So let's dive a little bit deeper in this whole idea of visual search. And remember when we talked this whole idea about action preparation? So what's going, remember there was that reaction time? So part of that reaction time is in that action preparation is the visual search. Your brain has to take the environment, process it, and then download it into the motor program for the output to complete the motor skill. So it's going to help decide the action selection, right? So based on the, what you're say I want to lift up a cup. Okay, so I'm going to use my left hand. It's going to constrain the selected action. Okay, so it's going to look at, okay, well, this is how far it is. This is what's required. Is there any obstacles in the way that I have to sort of modify my movement? So I have to go over a bench, for example, or go over a shelf or whatever. And then it's going to also be required to time your action initiation. Because remember, with open motor skills, the regulatory conditions, so the supporting surface, the objects, and people in the environment are moving, meaning that you have to time your motion with the environment. So the visual search in action preparation is going to be selecting the appropriate regulatory conditions to determine what to do. Any modifications or constraining how the action should be sort of constricted based on the environment, and then timing that. And in closed motor skills, we're still using a visual search. We just don't have to time our movement with the environment. But visual search is going to be utilized in the action preparation of both open and closed motor skills. And there was a whole bunch of studies looking at sort of the differences as what the visual search were, or how the visual search changed in beginners versus experts. And so we'll go through a couple of them now. This study looked at what people were looking at, or what tennis players were looking at while they were returning a serve. So they would look at, typically during the ritual phase while they're bouncing, they would look at the ball and the feet of the person. Then they would, when they go to prepare for launching the ball, they would look at sort of the ball. And then experts would look at sort of the trunk and shoulders to get an idea of which way the person was moving. And then during the execution phase, they would turn, all the attention would go to the ball. And that was probably for timing, right? So this is an example of what people would look at during motor skills. They did one study with badminton. So they found that the visual search happened in a critical window of 83 milliseconds before and after shuttle contact. So they would look at what the people were looking at, and they would focus in this window of 83 milliseconds. And that was consistent for both the beginners and the experts. So if they both all had the same window, obviously the experts are utilizing it more efficiently. Baseball, they looked at eye movements in professional ball players during action preparation of a pitch. And so what they found was that in comparison to beginners, experts during the pitch would focus in on the elbow, shoulder, and head mechanics of the pitcher versus during the pitch, the beginners only looked at the ball. So then the experts learned to look at the body of the pitcher initially to get a better idea of what was going to happen, and then focus in on the ball as it's released, versus beginners just look at the ball the whole time. Driving with the car, we talked about already, and that's this whole idea that experienced drivers tended to have more focused eye movements that would look at very specific things, whereas inexperienced drivers would have variable eye movement that would just look at everything. Now, this is a very, very important study. This is from Joan Vickers. So this is the University of Calgary, and she was the woman that developed this whole idea of a quiet eye. And what she was doing was she was looking at the Canadian women's basketball team, and she was analyzing them, looking at motor skill. She had them use the eye movement goggles, and then would look at them shooting free throws. And so what she found was that with the experts, she could dictate whether she noticed that there was a difference in the final fixation time. So there was a final fixate just before release of the ball. They would fixate on the rim, and that fixation time was longer when they hit the free throw versus when they missed. And then that fixation time was still true, but less for the near experts. So it showed that with experts or really good players, they were able to have a greater fixation time. So their eyes were better able to focus on what was most relevant for that motor skill. And then she was able to, with those people, whether or not they hit or miss, like she was able to guess whether or not they miss or hit the free throw based on the movement of the eye. So to see how the fixation time was greater when they hit the free throw versus when they didn't. Crazy, right? So she initially did this in 1996, University of Calgary, looking at basketball free throws. But then she found that this whole idea of the quiet eye, this is what she coined, it was true for all motor skills. And so it refers to the final eye fixation just before movement initiation. So it's the strategic part of the visual search process, and it happens. So you look at the environment, what's important, pick out the regulatory features, and then your eye fixates on the most important part for timing, or for like the last important part of the final thing to fixate before you perform the motor skill. And depending on, like, obviously what you're looking to be focusing in on is different for different types of motor skills, but the 4 common characteristics of the quiet eye phenomenon was that it is directed at a critical location or object for that motor skill. It is a stable fixation of gaze. It occurs just before the onset of movement, and it technically is, and it has been shown to be longer in elite performers. So that means that as you become better and better and better at a particular motor skill, your ability to develop that quiet eye phenomenon improves. And so we're running a little bit late on time, but I have shown a bunch of videos showing this quiet eye phenomenon in different aspects. And I highly recommend watching them. So this is the quiet eye in goaltending in the NHL. This is the quiet eye in policing. So they looked at the fixating of the cop's eyes when deciding whether or not to shoot someone. And then this one it's an old school PBS documentary, but golfing. It's cool. You guys okay? So we have now proven, based on the sort of research that I highlighted, that as you become better and better at a motor skill, your visual search improves. You're better able to pick out in the environment what's most important. Now, can you take that and then teach beginners, oh, this is what you should focus in on to make them better quicker? Absolutely. However, there's no such thing as a generalized visual training program. That if you're going to train a beginner to get better based on the sort of like what the professionals do or what the elites do, it has to be sport specific or task specific. There's no way to train like your eye for everything. So you got to like look at the experts, study them, and then you can apply that to the beginners for that particular sport or task. Everyone good? Boom. Does it relate to some extent though, right? There's probably similarities, right? But it's but you can't, you know, improve your visual search, be better at driving, chess, darts, and soccer. It's right because the soccer players are going to be looking at certain things, hockey players are going to be looking at certain things, basketball players. It's there's too much variation. But for obviously for tasks that are similar, there is going to be some relation in between tasks. How would you explain the concept of heavily multitask like video games? So I would say that your quiet eye has to focus in on one specific thing when you're accomplishing certain tasks. So I guess like depending on the video game, you have to do one specific thing. Remember, you can't change your attention. So if the eye is moving, right? If you have to do multiple things at once, it limits how much you can have your quiet eye for. Because you automatically have to draw your attention somewhere else. Cool. I don't know what Apex is, but sick. Yo, you guys should get a Twitch going and then like just play yourself video games. We'll talk about motor control and then money. Okay, let's finish up. So we're going to finish up by talking about memory. It's going to take about 10 minutes. I don't want to rush through it. I want to make sure that you guys get it. But memory is highly important in performing motor skills because when we learn to do something, do we forever forget it? If you learn to ride a bike, do you ever forget how to ride a bike? No. Why? So researchers want to look at that. So let's first delve into what is memory. Now, memory is the capacity of an organism to remember previous experiences because it allows us to learn from experiences to do or not do something again. Memory is defined as our capacity to remember past experiences. Its functions would include the storage of information, retrieving information, and then memory is part of our consciousness, right? We have our sort of central executive, our consciousness that's able to take things from the past and be aware of them. So part of our memory is our consciousness. And our memory structure is comprised into two functional things. There's working memory, which is our present day, what we're aware of in the present situation. And then long-term memory is where we store information to draw out again. So this is like saving information. And then working memory is like our sort of executive or our like sort of like cognition that we're processing. So then how does memory and sort of what we've learned about memory relate to motor skill performance? And so remember we have two different memory systems. We have our working memory, which is divided up into the phonological loop, the visuospatial sketchpad, and the central executive. And then our long-term memory, there's three types of long-term memories: procedural, semantic, and episodic. So I briefly just want to go through our structure of our memory and then talk about how it relates to motor skills. Again, this is the same group that did those nice like sort of animation videos. It's like 10 minutes long. It's awesome. Watch it. Okay. So working memory is associated with the sensory, perceptual, and attentional and short-term memory processes of the present, of like the current situation. So it is sort of our central executive, right? That's required to take information from our long-term memory plus processes of what we're aware of in that particular moment and then process it all together. It's our consciousness. So our working memory functions to enable people to respond to the demands of like right now. So it plays the critical role in decision-making, problem-solving, movement, planning, and execution. It's our consciousness, right? It interacts with long-term memory. That's where we store our information. And so it's constantly pulling out information from previous experiences and adapting that and pulling that all together. So the working memory is the interactive workspace where processing occurs. So in terms of attention demands, working memory is our consciousness. That's the amount of our attention. That's what we're able to process. So when we were talking about, remember, like the bottleneck theories, our working memory would be sort of the processing area. Does that make sense, everyone? No? Courtney, are you good? Oh, that was from a little bit ago. Okay. So through studies, and if you look at that video, they'll give you the sort of the background. It's not heavily important to understand where it's coming from, but there's three components of working memory. We've talked about the central executive that coordinates information, our processing power. The phonological loop is the short-term storage of verbal information, so words and numbers. The visual spatial sketchpad is our short-term sort of memorization of spatial information. So remember when you do those like searches, I don't even know what they're called, where like you got to like look at a thing and then like memory searches. Where right? Can someone know what those games are called? We got to remember where the things are. So they flip over. Here's where all the things are. Flip it over. Pick the two. Like a tile game, yeah. Matching games, like something like that. So we're able to process, we're able in our short-term memory to process words and numbers that we were trying to remember and like sort of the vision, and then it lasts, and then we either put it into our long-term memory or it's gone. So in terms of our working memory, it's been shown in studies that our ability to sort of remember that in our working memory for short term is between 20 and 30 seconds. In our working memory has a low capacity of only 7 plus or minus 2 items. So when you're getting someone to memorize something really quickly, hey, can you remember da 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 da? Typically, our capacity of things to remember, either visually or like words or just like amount of information, we can only really sort of memorize short term 7 plus or minus 2 things, and it only lasts about 30 seconds. The way to organize, like, you know how some people are really good at memorizing multiple things in a short amount of time? The way to do that is by what's called chunking. You're organizing things into groups. And that's why, for example, like our courses are divided up into units. I highly sort of want to, oh, Mariah just, what does that mean? Is that like a meme? Is that crying? Is that like, what is that? Yo, show the cat. That's cute. Okay. So the way to improve memory is by organizing things. So that's what I'm saying when you're trying to memorize like sort of information for the course. The best way to do it is you group things because it's now less daunting, right? So instead of memorizing, 70 things, you memorize 7 groups of 10 things. There's 7 groups. Okay, what's group 1? 10 things. The way to improve memory, both working memory and long-term memory, is called chunking or organizing information. It decreases the amount of information. Because in our working memory, so when we bring things out or bring things in, our capacity is only 7 plus or minus 2 things. So if I was like, yo, Courtney, give me, I don't know, give me all of the tracks in the motor. Okay, who took Internal Movement Neuroscience? Yo, tell me all 18 tracks. Go. It's too much. But what if you were like, okay, well, there's 3 groups. There is conscious relay pathways. There is the unconscious relay pathways to the cerebellum, and there is the medial pain pathways. 3. Okay, in the first one, there's 4. Like, see, it's easier to divide things up into small amounts because of this capacity of our working memory of only like 9 things. Yes, definitely like learning anatomy. And that's why in anatomy, you go through groups. What are the main external rotators of the hip? What are the internal rotators? Like, you know what I mean? Try to group things together. So working memory in relation to performing motor skills, because it's the right now situation, it'll allows us to remember current instructions or given instructions how to perform a task for 20 to 30 seconds. It'll allow us to, like, so let's say, with learning motor skills, we're doing trials, right? If I am playing darts and like I throw one dart and it's like off to the right, I remember that. So then I adjust it allows us to remember the previous attempt to adjust it. And then what it does is it also allows us to retrieve relevant information from long-term memory and bring it into our consciousness. Oh, I remember when I did this last time. It's like the working memory is like the processing area. And that's how it relates to sort of attention. And that's why the two lectures are like, or the two topics of this lecture are run together. Okay. So this is sort of bringing everything together. This is our working memory model. So it talks about, remember we were talking about like bottleneck theories. That's why it's sort of put like that, trying to bring it all together for us. You guys okay? 3 more minutes. Now let's talk about long-term memory. So long-term memory like serves as the permanent storage of information. Okay. Now, do you guys know if there is a capacity of long-term memory? It's hard to test. Like what's the limit of our long-term memory? For all intents and purposes, there is no limit. There's no study that can prove that there's a limit to what we can remember. Us forgetting stuff is not being able to retrieve it from our long-term memory. So when you are studying, you get the information in and you have to keep practicing taking it out, right? That's why cue cards work. Oh, you're drawing information. You're practicing or you're rehearsing your ability of working memory to find that memory in your long-term memory. Because when people have like brain injuries and stuff, they start talking about stuff that they haven't talked about in years that people would have assumed they forget. That stuff is still in there. Forgetting is a retrieval issue, not a memory storage like being deleted issue. So it's not a capacity. So for all intents and purposes, the duration of memories that are stored in our long-term memory are permanent. I hope that makes sense. It's a retrieval issue. I hope that really like sticks home with you guys. We're all gonna get A's and everything. Okay, so there's 3 types of different memories. There's procedural memories, semantic memories, and episodic memories. Procedural memories are the most relevant to motor skills because they are storing information on how to perform, like physically, how to perform a specific activity. It's an implicit memory because if I go to Apollo, how do you ride a bike? You're like, you like press on the pedal, sorry, and then you'll like turn the thing and like it's hard to verbalize, but you just get on a bike, you just do it. That's called a procedural memory. You've remembered the procedure. Semantic memory are facts and concepts. So this is an explicit memory that we can easily verbalize. And then episodic memories are, have you ever thought of something that's really relevant to you? Like, let's say like your first birthday, that's not, like your most recent birthday, or like, let's say your 19th birthday. When you have big memories that were impactful to you, you tend to remember, you remember the smell of, your first kiss. I don't know, like I'm reaching here, but you memorize like the weather, the smells, the sounds. Like it's like episodic memories are the memories of all of the sensory processes of that given situation. So for very important situations, we tend to memorize everything about that. Does that make sense, everyone? We can also verbalize it. So these is also an explicit memory. So this is explicit memories, implicit, difficult to verbalize. So so we're talking implicit versus explicit. Declarative means an explicit memory. So we have semantic and episodic that we can easily verbalize those memories, right? Semantic is facts and concepts, like words, types of things, like so studying, whereas episodic is memorizing the experience. Whereas procedural memory, so that's an implicit memory, that is talking about how we remember how to do something, like tying a shoe or riding a bike. Yes, exactly. So people with PTSD, they remember all, right? Very like a crazy situation. They remember everything, right? Exactly. So this is the divided up of long-term memory. And then in sort of the process of memorizing, we have to encode the information. We store it in long-term memory. Rehearsing it is the ability of getting information and retrieving it from long-term memory to use in your working memory. And how do you test memory? So how do I test you guys to see if you memorize the course? Tests, right? That's the way that we sort of test it. Explicit memory tests are for explicit memories. So recall tests are where you get someone to sort of bring out the information. So that would be an example like short answer or fill in the blank. Whereas a recognition test, test of do you recognize which one is the one that you remembered, like multiple choice. So recognition tests would be in a sense like a little bit easier than a recall test. But those are both explicit memory tests. Our midterm is both memory and because you like the course. So you're excited just to read about it. But yes, our midterm is not just memory. You are learning to apply the concepts, right? So because there'll be some examples and stuff. You're doing either like recall and recognition and tests. Whereas implicit memory tests are where you get someone to do something. So like practice and then a game situation. So let's talk about some of the causes of forgetting. They wanted to look at, it's difficult to test with time, but they wanted to see, like, so they would get someone to practice a motor skill and look at how long it would take for them to forget. It's kind of hard to test for long-term memory. So what they did was they wanted to look at, okay, so this is highly relevant to you guys studying, what are some of the factors that will sort of limit you from getting information in your brain? Like, so if memory is taking things into working memory and then putting it into long-term memory, what are some of the things that can interfere with that? And so what they looked at was proactive and retroactive interference. So an activity that occurs, so let's say there's something that you want to remember. What if you do a specific activity before the act that you want to remember, or a specific activity after? So you learn something, do an activity, and then they wait and see if you can memorize it after like a certain amount of time. So let me go to the next slide. Think of proactive interference as when you do the task, when you do like you multitask before memorizing, whereas retroactive interference is when you memorize and then do a task. And then remember the test for long-term memory is the recall or the recognition test. And so what they found in relation to motor skill performance, right? So if you want to memorize procedural memories or how to do a particular task, what they found, this was this one study, is that if you have the participant do an extra sort of task, either proactively or retroactively, if that task is similar than what they are supposed to remember, then it screws up their ability to process it into their long-term memory. So if you are going to multitask with studying, it can't, if you're doing two tasks that are sort of similar, it affects your ability to put it into long-term memory. Your long-term memory gets confused as to what bit is, like, because it's taking information and putting it in, right? So if you're doing two things at once that are very similar, your brain's gonna have a hard time separating them, and it's gonna put them in together when you're memorizing. It's gonna be a problem. So you know how some people can listen to like classical music while they're studying, some people need quiet? Those people that can listen to classical music while they're studying, is it because it's dissimilar? It's not interfering with the way that they're thinking in their head. It's not causing a problem. It's blocking out external noise probably. And other things that they wanted to look at were some like sort of movement characteristics that are related to motor performance. What research has looked at is what are things that are easier for people to memorize. Who was this? Marco, Mark, you were the personal trainer, right? They found that people, when you're teaching them to do a motor skill, people generally memorize endpoints better than movements. So if you're going to teach someone to do something, so when you teach someone how to do a bicep curl, here's start, here's finish. They would memorize that better, start and end point. You're better off at knowing the start and end point than like, oh no, the bicep curl is this motion. they're not gonna understand it. Right? So when you teach a golf swing, what do? They don't show you, oh, practice the swing. They say start here and here. It leads, so people are better at memorizing endpoints that are within their own body space. And it's probably related to proprioception. In terms of the meaningfulness of movement, it's important to understand that if you give someone movement patterns that they are familiar with, because so I think about like dancers, giving them a dance that they are sort of familiar with versus random sequences, people are better at processing quicker things that they're already familiar with. Makes sense, right? They're probably less processing is also required. If you want to increase sort of the meaningfulness of movement for someone when you're teaching them how to perform a motor skill, you can give them metaphoric imagery, or you can attach a verbal label. So giving them something to visualize, or sort of like a metaphor, tends to allow them to understand it better. Like, for example, like teaching golf by sort of demonstrating with like the clock face sort of example. It gives them something visually to sort of process, or attaching a verbal label of something that's meaningful for the action. So by adding another level of sort of awareness or understanding of that particular action, it allows them to process it better. And that's it. Any questions, guys? There is this video here. This is a guy that had I think he had an aneurysm, and he lost the part of the brain that's sort of responsible for short-term memory. So this is an interesting case of a gentleman that lost working memory. Yeah. So it was obviously a problem, but it's a very, very interesting case. So just to review everyone, I'm going to post an announcement that's going to dictate the number of questions from each lecture on the midterm. It's 65 multiple choice. I'll put the instructions. It's going to be next week from 3 to 5. You log in. You have to log in first into Respondus, and I'll put a link for that. I'm sure that I can find one. And then you will click on the link for the midterm, and I'll have that all in the announcement. Okay, guys? So give me a couple days to set that up. The exam or the midterm is on lectures 1 to 6. Everyone good? Promise? We're in this together. Ooh, pinky promise. That's for keeps. I get vaccinated tomorrow. Oh, Michael comes in here just to confirm. We are not able to see the answers. No. You can't see what you got right on the thing. Or else you would just tell everyone. Like, that's why. That's right, Drew. We're all bosses. Be the best you. Get it. Vaccine. Okay, bye. Oh, I gotta stop this. The exam is cumulative, yes.